Item C, hold public hearing and authorize the city manager to negotiate an agreement with Redflex Traffic Systems for a red light photo enforcement program. Chief Telford?
Good evening, Honorable Mayor and members of the City Council. Back in August, staff brought forward an informational report on the feasibility of a red light photo enforcement program in San Bruno. Tonight, I'm here to provide you with an update on our progress and a request to authorize the city manager to negotiate a contract with Redflex Traffic Systems following tonight's public hearing. In 2007, there were 12 people injured in 27 traffic accidents in San Bruno that were caused by motorists who ran a red light. A 2005 Department of Transportation study estimated that red light violations cause over 100,000 accidents and 1,000 fatalities each year in the United States. As you're aware, the department only has one traffic officer assigned solely to traffic enforcement. In order to reduce the amount of injuries and property damage caused by red light violations, many agencies have adopted photo enforcement to assist in providing traffic safety. Nationwide studies have shown that red light cameras reduce the number of violations and accidents. Studies have also shown that motorists in communities where red light cameras are in place tend to drive safer. A civil grand jury report that was released in March of this year found that Redwood City's red light photo enforcement program was successful in reducing collisions. Red light photo enforcement programs also exist in Menlo Park, San Carlos, San Mateo, Burlingame, Millbrae, and Daly City. Since we last reported to you, staff has conducted a request for proposals to identify a potential red light camera enforcement or equipment provider to further evaluate a photo enforcement program in San Bruno. The criteria in our request for proposals included experience, technology, image quality, reliability, and cost neutrality for the city, including a cost of a part-time employee to monitor and oversee the program. Staff from Finance, Public Works, and Police reviewed 2 proposals, and Redflex was selected as a preferred vendor based on a demonstrated history of providing quality product with customer satisfaction to over 70 law enforcement agencies in California. In addition, Redflex is known for operating within the guidelines set forth in the California Vehicle Code. Redflex was the only vendor that met all of our criteria in our request for proposals. The department conducted a review of traffic collisions over the last 5 years. Here you can see our high accident locations. Primarily, all of these are on El Camino along our highly traveled corridors, Sneath Lane, 380, San Bruno Avenue. We did ask Redflex to conduct some preliminary sample data at 5 of these intersections. Surveys were conducted on April 16th and May 22nd of this year. The surveys were done over a 12-hour period during peak traffic times. Initial surveys show only one intersection, Sneath Lane and El Camino, is having a moderate number of red light violations. And here you can see that El Camino and Real at Sneath Lane eastbound with 64 violations, 67 violations for westbound. There were 12 violations at El Camino and 380. Westbound, 5 violations, El Camino and 380 east, and an additional 5 violations at San Bruno Avenue and Cherry. I think it's really important to recognize that these are just preliminary surveys. And Redflex is also advising that additional surveys would be needed in order to determine if it's feasible and if we have a prosecutable number of violations at a selected intersection. It's also important to recognize that these violations that you see at El Camino and Sneath Lane, the majority of those, 90% of them are right turn violations. The difficulty with right turn violations is they may not be prosecutable. It depends on where the speed, the vehicle position in the intersection, and the roadway configuration. The remaining intersections, as I said, did not show a significant number of red light violations during the sample period that was sufficient for Redflex to offer cost neutrality. Staff was advised that Redflex typically likes to see straight through or left turn violations when guaranteeing cost neutrality. These types of violations are less subjective when compared to right turn on red light offenses. right turn on red lights are more subjective, as we will show you in just a second. And we do have some sample footage. The first violation is going to be a low speed, and look to, you'll see it right here, where that vehicle slows, and it's the white vehicle in the second to the right-hand turn lane, slows and goes through the intersection. We don't know the speed of this vehicle, so I can't tell you if that would be a violation or not. And as we further progress through our slideshow, you'll be able to understand why that may not be readily apparent. The next violation you're going to see is at a greater speed. This one is, you'll look for a blue vehicle, and you'll see it just goes right through the intersection. It's a failure to stop. That's a clear-cut violation. There's no question about it. I would have the officer issue the violation for that red light violation. The next violation is what's referred to as a limit line violation. Look for a white pickup truck that's coming up. Just a second. You'll see the vehicle stops, but its front wheels are over that limit line. So the camera captured that vehicle, but it stopped. So in that particular case, a violation would not be issued. And that is the concern over red light violations. So while you may see 67 red light violations on right turns at Sneath and El Camino, you may only find that 10 of them are prosecutable. We don't know, and that's what the further test data is going to tell us. The next footage is from Redflex, and this allows you to see the quality of the image and the information provided to the officer reviewing the footage. Bear with us just a second. In addition to the date and the time that you'll see on the top of the screen, the footage also tells you how fast that vehicle was traveling, how long that red light was red for, and you'll see several different views. So the first view is a snapshot of the vehicle before the limit line when the light is red. It's going through the intersection on the red light. You can clearly see the driver. By the way, this is a 2008 photo, but the driver is on his cell phone. Go ahead. You can clearly see the license plate. And what the footage provides you is, the footage provides you a video of the violation. Go ahead. So you'll see the car coming up. And there's the violation. The next footage shows you a nighttime scene. Go ahead. And again, clearly a violation. We also asked in our request for proposals to provide us all different type of weather conditions. Here you see a rain condition. Go ahead. And the next footage would be inclement weather at nighttime. And you'll notice the pedestrians going across the street that had to wait for the vehicle to run the red light. Here you show where there is a glare, but again, as you can clearly see, there is an identifiable driver and an identifiable license plate to issue the citation. And the next footage we have shows you multiple violations. And finally, we'll show you one more multiple violation, and unfortunately, we'll get back to our presentation. And again, the equipment's ability to capture the violations in a variety of conditions. Redflex is requesting the city enter into a no-cost, no-risk agreement with the company before any additional survey work begins. The location of our intersections will be selected by staff and engineering staff and would also be based on collision history. The California Vehicle Code requires the City Council to hold a public hearing on the proposed red light photo enforcement program prior to negotiating and entering into a contract. The contract to be negotiated with Redflex is for a comprehensive program that would be funded through fines received from violations. Redflex advised a minimum of 3 to 6 prosecutable violations per day is required to cover the equipment and program management costs. If the number of violations is sufficient to cover the equipment lease and program management costs, Redflex would work with the engineering department and Caltrans, if on a Caltrans right-of-way, to submit plans and obtain the necessary permits for equipment installation. Redflex would then proceed to install the red light photo enforcement equipment and continue to service and maintain the equipment for the life of the contract. Redflex estimates it would take 120 days to become operational at intersections on city right-of-way and 6 to 9 months on Caltrans right-of-way. Prior to any enforcement through the use of photo equipment, the department is required by statute to post signs that notify motorists of photo enforcement at every entrance into the city, establish a yellow light interval as provided in the Department of Transportation Traffic Manual, and provide a 30-day warning period upon commencement of the program. The department is also required to develop guidelines for the administration of the day-to-day operations of the system, which includes selection of the camera location, making sure the equipment is maintained and in proper working order, and ensuring the confidentiality of the photographic records. The department would have to add part-time staff or contract with another law enforcement agency to administer the program. We estimate this to be about 20 hours per week, possibly less depending on the number of intersections, if it is feasible to move forward with the program. To monitor the program, as you can see from the video, the officer has to review to see if there was a violation that occurred. He has to obtain the driver's license information and make sure that that motorist that's captured on film is the person with the driver's license, and then issue that citation. As I mentioned, several agencies use the services of retired police officers to administer this program, and we could contract with another agency to administer the program. If directed to proceed, the department will work with the engineering department and Redflex to conduct surveys at those locations identified with the most traffic accident history. In the event that the number of violations and anticipated fines do not reach the lease and program maintenance fees, staff will report back to the City Council, at which time the Council could direct staff to use general funds to cover the equipment and maintenance costs, or direct staff to delay the implementation of a red light camera enforcement program until such time as traffic patterns increase or additional funds become available. The cost to lease a red light photo enforcement equipment for one direction of an intersection, and that's commonly referred to as an approach, is $6,070 per month. Larger multiple lane intersections may require more than one approach, such as Sneath and El Camino. If the additional surveys reveal a sufficient number of violations to proceed, Redflex is offering a cost neutrality clause in the proposed contract, meaning the city would only pay the monthly equipment flat fee after it has received the equivalent amount in fines from citations issued as a result of the red light photo enforcement. In the event that fines do not meet the monthly lease costs, Redflex will absorb the cost difference. The California Vehicle Code only allows the equipment provider to recover costs based on the value of the equipment installed and not based on a percentage of the citation. A red light photo enforcement program would require the equivalent, as I mentioned, of one part-time employee to review those violations, issue citations, and provide courtroom testimony. If the program is operational, Redflex will allow the city to recover those costs for the administration of the program at an amount that will be covered from the fines received through violations. If the fines do not equal the negotiated program administration costs, Redflex will agree to absorb the difference in order to provide cost neutrality to the city. Administration costs to run the program are estimated at anywhere from $23,000 to $47,000 annually, depending on the number of intersections with photo enforcement and the number of violations that were being reviewed. Staff is aware that there have been challenges to cost neutrality provisions in red light photo enforcement contracts. Redflex has been successful in defending challenges to their cost neutrality contracts in court. We're also aware that the majority of the San Mateo County agencies that are employing a red light photo enforcement program have similar cost neutral clauses in their contracts. Those have withstood as court scrutiny in San Mateo County, and staff would continue to follow the legal challenges, provide contract language that we believe meets the requirements of the vehicle code before we even provide a contract for the city attorney to review. Net program revenue received from red light photo enforcement could be used to expand the program to other intersections or further traffic and pedestrian safety management enforcement in other areas of the city. The portion of fines that would come back to San Bruno from a red light violation are estimated at $119 per citation. Once again, I think it's important to recognize that this is a very preliminary study. The reason why we are before you here tonight is to ask for your authorization to enter into contract negotiations with Redflex and to hold a public hearing, which is required by the California Vehicle Code. It's important to recognize there may not be a significant number of red light violations at those intersections that you previously saw. But the only way to determine that is to enter into that contract. That concludes my presentation. I'll be happy to answer any questions. With us tonight, we have Wade Bettisworth, who is the Western Regional Director from Redflex Traffic Systems.
Any questions of staff at this time? Irene?
Thank you. On your number of collisions chart, you say El Camino and Sneath Lane, 76 collisions, but you don't say which directions. Is it just a combination of all of the directions?
The violations for El Camino Real at Sneath Lane going eastbound was 64.
Yes, but your collisions...
Okay, in terms of the, yes. I could respond back to council with those directions of east or west Sneath Lane.
Okay, the reason I'm asking is if we pick one, it would be, I would think the one that had the most collisions rather than just the ones that had the most violations, since there's only 3. If we pick one direction, there's only 3 violations separating each direction. So if
Correct.
there's a significant amount more collisions in one direction than the other, I think we would have to
Absolutely.
look at that one first. I have another question. When we keep saying red light violations, and honestly I can't remember what the definition is. Is it when your wheels, the back wheels, the front wheels pass the pedestrian lines when the light turns red, or you're halfway through and it turns yellow, or could you clarify it for everyone, please? Sure.
When the vehicle's front wheels are behind the first limit line, if that light is red and that vehicle continues across that first limit line, it's a red light violation.
Okay, so if you're halfway through the intersection because it's yellow and then it turns red while you're halfway through the intersection, that's not a violation?
Correct.
Okay.
And so they can, with the cameras, they can only cite the driver if the driver is the vehicle owner, is that correct?
Correct. And it's important to recognize, and I'm not sure I mentioned this in the presentation, that several violations aren't enforced because there is an obscured view of the driver.
Okay.
Any other questions? Okay, this is a public hearing. Anyone wishing to address the council on this issue?
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and Council. My name is Bernice Tatola, and I have been a resident in San Bruno for almost my entire life, and I would like to voice my support for introducing Redflex to San Bruno. Last week, my cousin was involved in a car collision on the intersection of 101 southbound and San Bruno Avenue. I've also witnessed numerous violations as demonstrated on the slideshow. So I think that it would be a good way to introduce more revenue to San Bruno, and it would be a lot of help for the one traffic officer that we have. I have been guilty myself of a California roll on Hillsdale Boulevard in San Mateo, and when I was done with court and had gone to pay my fine, over $200, I had met 3 other individuals that were also guilty of the same red light traffic violation at that intersection. So I think it's around $271 per violation, depending on the ordinances of certain counties and cities. But I think it's a good idea, and it would be a nice investment for the city of San Bruno. Thank you.
Thank you.
Scott Bushman, Claremont Drive. I too support any such action like this that would make our streets safer. This almost sounds too good to be true, though, that they're going to really absorb all the costs. That would be great. But as far as the cost neutral, I did read about some of the, there was a state appellate lawsuit, or the state ruled that some, I guess, cost neutral contracts were illegal or not valid, and I'm not sure what the difference is between ours and theirs, but I'm sure it sounds like you're following that. But I thought Millbrae's was one that was invalid. But as long as we're on top of that, that's great. I also read somewhere that the San Mateo and Redwood City, who also use Redflex, I believe they, individuals of Redflex, their employees review the photos first to weed out the bad photos or the questionable ones. And I was curious if San Bruno was going to have that service available too. I guess the fine is going to kind of be determined. I know the chief said it's something about 119 per citation would go to the city. That's great. And the other thing I read as far as Millbrae goes, that when you do the calculations, they receive actually about 70% of the fines are actually paid. So I don't know if you've heard that, or if that goes into the work as far as whether this is cost effective or not. But again, if they're really going to absorb the cost and it all stands up in court, I'm all for it. Thank you very much. Oh, and did I say, I'm at Sneath and El Camino Real every day, and the left turn, the westbound left turn lane, I see people go through that quite regularly. Thank you very much. Bye.
Chief, do you have any information on the weed out process regarding this Redflex staff weed out?
No, city staff, and again, it's required by the vehicle code. City staff would review and weed out those violations. Redflex is merely the provider of the equipment and maintenance.
Tim Kelly, Oak Avenue. I discussed this with a son-in-law who is a reserve police officer in San Mateo. And after the conversation, I would heartily endorse what you're proposing to do. I asked him, did the program in San Mateo have the effect of reducing the number of citable violations? And he said it did. I do have a couple of questions. One, has there ever been a case in which a cited driver under this program has successfully challenged the citation at a hearing? And the second question is there room under the law to consider a sliding scale of fines based on the severity of the problem, greater at some intersections than it is in others? I think it might be fair to consider a higher fine at Sneath and El Camino, for example, than at San Bruno Avenue and Cherry. I just want to raise that possibility. Thank you.
Thank you. If the city attorney could add some input on those. One was, has there ever been a successful appeal with a cited driver? And then secondly, could you have a sliding scale on the fine for red light
different
violations?
locations. Well, first, let me address the issue this way, is that there's, legally, the city can engage in a contract to allow this type of enforcement. And so that has been upheld. What has been challenged in a number of different jurisdictions is the way that it is paid for. The state law specifically requires that a city cannot enter into a contract that is based, or the compensation to the company is based on the number of tickets issued or the percentage of revenues. And so the issue then becomes, and it's what the chief alluded to, is a cost neutrality provision. Does that fit within the confines of what the state law requires, or is it really a contingency fee? And that issue is being litigated in several places currently. There is a case before the California Supreme Court that is awaiting briefing. They're awaiting a decision in a different case that has a related issue before they're going to speak to that. So we would need to look at that provision very carefully to make sure that the city is adequately protected in the way that the compensation would work. So that's really been the way that challenges have primarily come up. With respect to sliding scales, can't do sliding scales at different locations, I don't believe would be permissible.
Okay. Anyone else wishing to address the council on the red light issue? Seeing no one, is there a motion to close the public hearing?
So moved. Second.
Motion and second. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Council discussion, or?
I have one more question.
Mhm.
If the red light enforcement decreases the violations at any one given place, then subsequently the revenues for that will also decrease. So knowing all that, they're still willing to do a cost-neutral contract. We want the violations to decrease, but we still want the revenue.
Maybe if I could ask the Redflex representative, Mr. Wade Bettisworth, to
Honorable Mayor, Council, City staff, as well as the residents of San Bruno. My name is Wade Bettisworth. I'm with Redflex Traffic Systems. Thank you for the opportunity to discuss this topic with you this evening. In terms of the question on the viability of an intersection, first of all, when we look at certain intersections within the community, we obviously want to be very careful in terms of selecting ones that are going to have enough violations to justify installing the equipment. So there's a variety of things that we do. We will conduct a video survey, which is typically done over a 12-hour time frame, which we will monitor the number of violations for left-hand turns, straight-throughs, and rights. And we've done that on a preliminary basis here within the city. And also to support that, we also will collect data from the city. There's about 12 items of data that we ask for. Would be anything from average daily traffic count to approach speed, to 85th percentile speed, to percent of big rigs, a number of factors that have been determined to be drivers of red light violations. So when we look at an intersection, we want to make sure that that there's enough violations in order to move forward with the program, knowing that there is going to be some corrective behavior, and then what's going to basically would plateau off. Now, the degree in terms of which there's corrective behavior and those violations reduce is tied very closely to the amount of transit traffic that you have through the community. So a community that has a lot of transit traffic would see that the numbers would stay higher than a community that does not have a lot of transit traffic. So in terms of the El Camino Real and some of the other locations that we'd looked at, I would imagine that the percent of transit traffic is relatively high. So that's basically a risk that we take as the technology partner to the city, is that through our 20 years experience and looking at intersections within a city and making recommendations, and then working with the police department to select locations, we draw on that 20 years experience, and we've been pretty successful at jointly working with the city to select those locations.
Thank you.
Any other questions from council?
Through the chair.
Councilmember Martina?
I was just going to say I want to thank staff for the work when this was brought up before. I think there was some concern, but obviously thus far it's not been, aside from some staff time, for the reports, a lot of the work is outsourced, and therefore they're bringing the results, they're doing the work, if I'm not mistaken, and the survey results that we're seeing here tonight, correct?
Correct. And I would like to mention that I know that it may seem that staff has taken a extremely long time on this. I would just like to point out that there has been quite a bit of progress with Caltrans. Redflex is now advising of a 6 to 9 month implementation if those numbers were sufficient, where back in September I was telling you it was going to be a year. So I know you've been patient, but you are correct. There has been work done behind the scenes, and there has been significant progress made.
And no matter what you hear, I am sometimes a patient man. I can be. But I know...
Always trying to copy me.
Yeah. I know the mayor was concerned about the Caltrans. I know that's improved, and I think the time that is spent, even though I was patient, I think that we have some good results that have come forward. And unless there's any other... I believe it's an effective tool that does and can change behavior, which I think can prevent injuries and maybe save lives. So I think it's worth going forward and doing the further survey and investigation and bringing that before the council. And if there's no other discussion...
I just had one point. Chief, if you could just, for the people listening, kind of give an outline, timeline as to when you think if this passes this evening and the study proves successful, when do you think you're going to see cameras on the street?
Sure. To move forward with the proposal in the contract and get additional survey data, 30 to 60 days. To implement a red light enforcement program on a non-Caltrans street, estimated at 120 days. To put cameras up and have them operational on a Caltrans right-of-way, 6 months to 9 months.
Okay. And the majority of the streets that were identified, or intersections that were identified, I think all but 2 were on Caltrans right-of-ways between El Camino and Skyline Boulevard, Interstate 280, and...
You're correct.
So, okay. Any action from council?
I'll make a motion that we authorize the city manager to negotiate an agreement.
Second?
Motion and a second. Discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.